You know that weird thing where you suddenly start seeing your specific car model everywhere after you buy one? It's like the universe suddenly decided to flood your neighborhood with it.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
That little quirk of perception gives us a tiny glimpse into something much broader. How our beliefs, those things we hold as true, can be subtly shaped, even directed, without our conscious awareness. It's about how our brains filter information and what makes certain things pop out at us.
Right, and what's interesting to consider is the mechanism behind that. When you buy that car, you've basically told your brain, hey, this is important now.
Okay.
And that activates a network, a system in your brain that starts prioritizing that specific visual data. To extend that idea, what if that prioritization, that subconscious filtering, was being nudged?
Nudged by external factors.
Exactly. Subtly directing what you pay attention to and, well, maybe what you end up believing.
Okay, right. And that's the core of what we're diving into today. Subconscious psychological operations, or SKOP.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
We're going to explore how these operations can work to influence your beliefs and perceptions, often operating, beneath the radar of your conscious thought.
And to help us unpack this, we're drawing on insights from an expert, we'll just call him BK, who has a background in FBI training and psychological profiling.
So he brings a specific perspective on how these subtle influences can be strategically used.
Definitely. And the crucial question then becomes, how do these operations actually work inside our minds? We'll be looking at several key areas that BK's insights touch on.
Like what?
Things like engineered reality, shaping the information. You see also how certain vulnerabilities in our brain structure might be leveraged.
Okay, brain structure.
Yeah, the power of narrative control, how emotional attachments play a role, a technique called fractionation, and, well, the potential for manipulation on a much larger scale.
And to make this really concrete, we're going to look at a time we all remember vividly, the COVID-19 pandemic. We'll explore how some of these very techniques might have been in play, shifting public perception, moving what's called the Overton Window.
The range of acceptable ideas, right?
Right. And ultimately normalizing certain behaviors and, frankly, levels of compliance.
And connecting this back, recognizing these mechanisms isn't really about becoming paranoid,
Yeah.
It's more about cultivating a deeper awareness of how information shapes us.
Right. Being more discerning.
Exactly. Understanding these subtle influences helps us become better consumers of information and, hopefully, more resilient in our own critical thinking.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with something we all deal with constantly, the internet. BK shared a perspective from a YouTube channel that highlights this really rapid cycle online. You see something, it triggers a feeling, and boom, you form an association.
And the key there is the speed. The speed and the lack of conscious analysis time. As that source suggests, in the fast flow of scrolling, swiping,
Yeah.
we often react emotionally first.
Before we really think it through.
Right. We make connections before we've had a chance to critically assess the information itself. And these little fleeting feelings, these instant associations, they can subtly shape what we believe next.
And the striking point made is that this isn't always accidental. The way many platforms are designed, the constant stream of stuff, it can almost be seen as a formula, like a recipe for shaping beliefs through repetition and hitting those emotional buttons.
Billions of times a day, potentially.
Wow.
Yeah, if you think about the sheer volume of digital information we swim in, our brains are constantly soaking up curated content. Content designed to get specific emotional reactions, forge specific links.
So this constant barrage can just subtly mold our view of the world, and we might not even realize it's happening.
Pretty much. Often without explicit awareness or, conscious deliberation.
Okay, now let's look at the hardware, the brain itself, and how certain parts might be, more vulnerable to this kind of subtle stuff. BK talks about the triune brain model.
Yes, the three parts, reptilian, limbic, neocortex.
Right, like layers of development. The reptilian brain for basic survival, hungry, impulse.
Fight or flight, that sort of thing.
Then the limbic system, the feeling center, emotions.
And finally, the neocortex, the smart brain, for higher level thinking, reasoning, language. And what's really key here is understanding that the older parts, the reptilian and limbic systems, they react primarily to sensory input, visuals, strong emotions. They don't really process language in the complex way the neocortex does.
So highly emotional images or videos can hit those lower centers more directly.
Exactly. They can have a more immediate impact on our feelings, our gut reactions, sometimes bypassing our more rational, analytical thought processes.
So even though our neocortex, our thinking brain, can analyze critically, this constant flood of emotional, visual stuff can sometimes just sneak past it.
It can appeal directly to our more instinctual emotional sides, yeah.
Which brings up a big question. If those older parts are so responsive, how do we get our neocortex more involved? How do we use it as a shield?
Well, the source emphasizes consciously engaging those analytical skills, actively questioning what you see and hear, forming your own reasoned conclusions instead of just passively absorbing the feed.
Right, don't just react. Think. Which leads us straight to this idea of SEOPS. Drawing on BK's insights and that video, SEOPS are basically strategic efforts using media, social, TV, maybe even government comms to influence our subconscious beliefs.
And a major tactic within SEOPS is creating what they call engineered reality.
Engineered reality, what does that actually mean?
It's about shaping the information environment, basically. Making sure you're looking at this, maybe so you don't look at that. It's distraction, but also direction.
So it's not necessarily about lies, but about managing attention.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Managing what people are paying attention to, and therefore what forms the basis of their understanding their reality.
And BK gave a pretty specific example, didn't he? The New Jersey drone sightings back in late 2024.
He did. He suggested this could have been an instance of engineered reality, a managed event designed to pull public focus away from something else happening around the same time.
Which was?
Well, contextually, he noted it was around the time President Biden pardoned his son, Hunter, that was getting a lot of press. BK, based on his background and claimed access to certain info, suggested the drone story might have been amplified as a diversion.
A classic misdirection, like a magic trick.
Pretty much. Look at this hand, not the other one. And BK also mentioned another potential sign of this kind of coordination, seeing really similar messaging, like identical phrases, across different news outlets.
When everyone suddenly starts using the exact same term for something.
Right. When you see that kind of uniformity, he suggests it could indicate a concerted push to shape the public conversation from a central point.
Okay, so how does that narrative control actually work then? The source used that coffee mug example.
Yeah, that was a good one. The mug itself is a fact, right? It exists. But the story around the mug, maybe framing it as a symbol of, say, exploitative labor. That's the narrative. It's a story built using the fact, but interpreting it.
Right. And the key thing is narratives aren't just true or false. They're built by picking certain facts, emphasizing some, maybe leaving others out.
Or even adding a few little distortions, potentially. Controlling the narrative isn't just lying. It's about drawing the circle, defining how people understand the facts, the meaning they make.
It's about framing.
Exactly. Strategic framing. Choosing the context to influence how facts are perceived.
And the defense against this, both sources seem to say, use your neocortex, use your rational mind to build your own narrative.
Right. Question the stories you're told. Look for different sources, different angles. Form your own independent take rather than just accepting the prepackaged version.
It comes back to critical thinking skills. Being able to spot bias, seeking out multiple views, those are the tools you need in this kind of environment.
Absolutely essential.
Now, let's go back to that car example again. BK used it to show how our brains prioritize info based on what we decide is important. You buy the car, you tell your brain this matters, and it influences your limbic system and something called the reticular activating system, the RAS.
The RAS, yeah. It acts like a filter, a gatekeeper for all the sensory information flooding our brains. When we focus on something like looking for that new car, the RAS gets primed to let that specific information through.
Making us notice it more.
Right, and making other stuff seem almost invisible in comparison. And this filtering gets stronger with repetition and emotional weight.
So, in a sense, you're literally training your own brain to see more of whatever you focus on. BK mentioned this applies to attraction, too. Focus on certain traits.
And you're basically training your RAS to spot those traits in people you meet. It highlights how powerful our own focus is in shaping perception.
Which raises that question again. If our own focus does that, what happens when external forces are subtly directing where we put that focus?
Could that mechanism be sort of hijacked, used to influence our perceptions without us even realizing our focus has been guided? It's a concerning thought.
Yeah. And this connects to another brain area, the nucleus accumbens. BK explained this part of the limbic system is key for reward-related memory.
Right. When we do something that gives us a hit of dopamine or serotonin, those feel-good chemicals, the nucleus accumbens logs that memory and basically says, hey, do that again.
It drives us to repeat pleasurable activities.
And think about how that reward pathway can be engaged, maybe even exploited. Social media platforms are kind of masters of this, aren't they? Likes, notifications, little intermittent dopamine hits.
Keeping you coming back for more.
Exactly. It creates a feedback loop, encouraging you to seek out those same stimuli, reinforcing certain behaviors, maybe even leading to habitual use.
It's not just individual rewards, though, is it? Attachment is huge, too. Oxytocin.
The bonding hormone, yeah.
Yeah.
BK highlighted how its release can differ, say, between men and women during intimacy, potentially creating imbalances in bonding and maybe vulnerability.
Vulnerability to believing what the person you're attached to wants you to believe.
It can certainly make you more receptive, more trusting. When you feel a strong emotional connection, you naturally tend to lower your defenses and accept their views more readily. It's a powerful influence.
And this isn't just about people, right? We get attached to ideas, too. Ideologies.
Absolutely. And those attachments can be leveraged in similar ways. When our emotions are really fired up about an idea or a group, it can cloud our critical judgment.
Making us susceptible to what BK called magical thinking.
Yeah, like assigning power or meaning illogically to maintain a belief or a fantasy, especially when strong emotions are involved. It makes us vulnerable, potentially even delusional. BK stressed that delusion isn't rare. It can be induced more easily than we might think.
Wow. The tactics used in cult brainwashing sound like an extreme version of exploiting all this.
They really are. BK pointed out that the same basic ingredients are often there. Playing on attraction, creating intense emotional bonds, and crucially, targeting unmet needs.
Finding that void in someone.
Right. Cult leaders are often adept at identifying what someone feels is missing significance, belonging, purpose, and promising to fill that void. They might even use techniques to stimulate the vagus nerve, creating those strong gut feelings that seem to confirm the belief is right.
And BK mentioned a statistic about how many people are maybe more susceptible.
Yeah, he cited a figure suggesting around 25-27% of people might be easily led, often because of those unmet needs and a deep desire to fill some kind of emptiness. It highlights a significant potential vulnerability.
So, okay, if someone has been heavily influenced or manipulated, are there signs, ways to recognize it?
BK describes some potential behavioral indicators, things like withdrawn body language, he called it turtling, like the chin dropping, shoulders slumped, protecting vital organs almost.
Subconscious protection.
Seems like it. Also, maybe a slower gait, avoiding eye contact, especially with authority figures. It can stem from a subconscious fear or deference developed through the manipulation.
And the social dynamic, the US versus them thing.
That's huge. Manipulators and cult leaders often create a really stark us versus them world. The outside world, or anyone who disagrees, is painted as dangerous, wrong, evil.
Which strengthens the group's bond.
Exactly. It fosters cohesion, dependence on the group, and leads to protective behaviors and even specific language jargon or loaded terms that reinforces who's in and who's out.
BK even mentioned seeing some of this during the pandemic years, people reacting with fear.
He shared some personal observations, yeah. Seeing people tense up if a certain forbidden word was mentioned, or even confronting strangers for not wearing a mask while, say, jogging alone outdoors. Potential signs of those deep-seated, fear-based reactions being triggered.
It makes you wonder where the line is between genuine public health concern and maybe manipulated fear responses.
It's a difficult line to draw sometimes, but recognizing those behavioral patterns can offer clues about the psychological impact of things like intense media messaging and widespread anxiety.
And the parallels between cult tactics and some COVID measures, BK brought that up too. Sacrifices, rituals.
Yeah, he pointed out how cults often demand sacrifices time, money, relationships, and impose rituals, like specific clothing or repetitive actions.
And the potential parallel.
Well, he suggested considering things like mask mandates or strict social distancing. Could they, perhaps unintentionally, function a bit like rituals that help normalize compliance? It's a provocative thought.
And the foot in the door idea, starting small.
Right. The initial 15 days to flatten the curve, which then, evolved into much longer and broader restrictions. Get compliance on a small thing, then it's easier to get compliance on bigger things later.
And for some, that compliance became part of their identity. Still wearing masks alone in the car years later.
BK noted that, yeah. The behavior became deeply ingrained, perhaps tied to a sense of virtue or group identity, persisting long after the original justification faded for many.
Are some people just naturally more susceptible, personality-wise?
BK mentioned agreeableness as one trait. People naturally higher in agreeableness might be, more inclined to go along with external directives to maintain harmony.
Makes sense.
He also talked about a framework called PCP, perception, context, permission. Basically, how manipulating the context of a request can drastically change how people perceive it and whether they grant permission or comply.
Like asking someone to do something weird, but framing it in a way that makes it seem normal in that specific situation.
Exactly. Change the context, you can change the perception and the resulting behavior.
Is anyone less susceptible?
Interestingly, BK suggested that people with a constantly active dorsal medial prefrontal cortex, often linked with traits like hypervigilance, maybe some anxiety patterns, or even cluster-us, personality traits might be less easily manipulated because their baseline alertness and internal monitoring is already cranked up high. They're sort of always questioning.
Huh. And what are the common needs manipulators target?
BK listed 6 key human needs often exploited. The need for significance, for approval, for acceptance, the need to be seen as intelligent, the desire for power or control, and even sometimes the need to be pitied. Find the need, promise to meet it, you gain leverage.
Okay, so that's influence, maybe manipulation. When does it cross the line into actual brainwashing?
According to BK, the escalation happens when you add specific ingredients. Isolation is a big one. Cutting people off from counter-narratives and support systems, then engaging really strong feelings, and introducing significant, often relentless, stress.
And fractionation, you mentioned that earlier.
Right, fractionation is key here. It's a technique reportedly used by intelligence agencies, but also in marketing, and even embedded in how smartphones and social media work.
How does it work?
It involves deliberately alternating between things you like, things that give you pleasure or comfort, and things that make you angry, fearful, or anxious. This emotional seesaw creates instability.
Like scrolling through your feed. Cute puppy, terrifying news report, funny meme, political outrage.
Exactly like that. That constant up and down can make you feel emotionally unsteady, maybe more dependent on the source of the information, or looking for something or someone to provide stability.
And often, the person or platform causing the instability presents itself as the solution, the source of safety or truth.
Precisely. The world is chaotic and scary, but stick with Mustis ideology, and you'll be safe, informed, righteous. It's a classic manipulation pattern. Recognizing that emotional roller coaster is the first step to resisting it.
Can this get really extreme, like talking someone into violence?
BK outlined factors that, in extreme situations, can apparently lead a normal person towards committing harm, potentially very quickly. He listed 6: suggestibility, focus, openness, connection, compliance, and expectancy. You don't need all 6 at max, but strong levels and maybe 3 can be enough in the right context.
Wow. Are there examples?
The Milgram experiment is a classic, showing how authority, compliance, a focused, unfamiliar environment focus, and the expectation to obey, expectancy, suggestibility, led people to administer what they thought were harmful shocks.
The setting itself played a role.
Yes, unfamiliar environments tend to increase focus and can actually lower activity in the higher brain regions associated with independent judgment. Makes you more reliant on external cues.
And the Patty Hearst case.
A stark, real-world example. Extreme isolation, restricted calories, constant propaganda, fear. It broke down her existing identity and replaced it with her captor's ideology, leading her to participate in crimes. Classic Stockholm Syndrome, but achieved through intense, targeted manipulation.
And BK confirmed governments use these kinds of extreme techniques.
He stated they have been used, yes, on prisoners of war, in espionage to create double agents. The process often involves breaking someone down through intense focus, often fear-induced, agitation disrupting normal patterns, caloric restriction, and relentless repetition of the desired message.
Which loops back to the main question: do governments use these SQOPS techniques more broadly on their own populations?
BK, drawing on his background, asserts that yes, intelligence agencies and potentially other government arms do use these methods, sometimes subtly, sometimes protecting assets who seem independent. He even floated the idea about Charles Manson maybe having undisclosed support or being influenced by drugs, though that's speculative.
But the core idea is government SQOPS as engineered reality.
Exactly. Primarily as a tool for distraction and managing public attention. Look at this shiny object, not at this inconvenient truth. And he reiterated that deliberately causing fear is a known tactic to make populations accept things they wouldn't normally agree to.
Did he give other potential SKOPS examples?
He mentioned the Chinese weather balloon incident in early 23. It happened right as COVID restrictions were winding down. The detail about it containing American tech raised questions for him about the official story and whether it served as a timely distraction or narrative shift.
And the consistent messaging across news outlets.
He sees that as a potential indicator. When multiple supposedly independent news sources start using the exact same talking points, the same unusual phrases like threat to our democracy, appearing everywhere simultaneously, he suggests it might point to central distributed narratives, maybe from a deep state type entity or coordinated effort.
And the New Jersey drones again?
Yeah, he mentioned information suggesting they were initially U.S. assets on a mission, but the timing and the uniform media coverage might indicate they were later leveraged as a Cas-Offy, a distraction. Again, referencing access to certain documents.
And COVID itself, the fear.
He framed the handling of the pandemic, particularly the amplification of fear and the justification used for restrictions many now questioned, like outdoor masking or strict distancing as a potential large-scale example, exploiting social needs, fear of ostracism, and fear of the virus to achieve widespread compliance with measures framed as necessary rituals. Which brings us to the Overton window again, how governments might try to shift what's acceptable.
Right. BK laid out a kind of hypothetical playbook for a government-engineered, world-changing manufactured event, how it might unfold in phases.
Okay, what are the phases?
First, subtly move the Overton window. Normalize previously fringe ideas through steady news coverage. Phase 2, set the stage for the big reveal, build tension, create fear around the issue.
So priming the population.
Exactly. Phase 3, create a need for salvation, positioning the government as the only entity capable of rescuing people. Then, phase 4, escalate reports, personalize it with man-on-the-street stories to make it feel real and immediate.
Getting more intense.
Phase 5, an organized media blitz, uniform messaging everywhere. Phase 6, the main event, the government-engineered global event itself, which could be real chaos exploited or potentially even fabricated.
Me too.
Phase 7, offering the pre-planned solution, which usually involves increased government control and decreased individual freedoms presented as necessary for safety.
And this solution was ready all along.
That's the implication in this model. He used the Patriot Act after 9/11 as a potential historical example. A major event happens, and suddenly, legislation that drastically expands surveillance powers, perhaps waiting in the wings, gets passed quickly in the name of security.
Initially framed as temporary, perhaps.
Often, yes, but frequently becomes long-lasting or permanent. It highlights how manufactured beliefs and intense emotions can pave the way for agendas that wouldn't fly in normal times. Understanding this process is key to resisting it.
So what are the ultimate goals behind these SKOPS, according to BK?
He suggested several possibilities: fostering unquestioning trust or dependency on government, making the public willing to give up freedoms voluntarily, getting acceptance for restrictions that might quietly become permanent.
Okay.
And he offered a kind of litmus test question for you, the listener. When a big crisis hits and the government proposes a solution, ask yourself, does this solution primarily increase government power or take away individual freedoms? If the answer is yes, he suggests looking back at the weeks and months leading up to the crisis. See if you can spot any of those phases he outlined: the Overton window shift, the fear building, the media blitz. It's a way to apply critical thinking.
It really puts the onus on us to examine not just the crisis, but the lead up and the proposed solutions, doesn't it? To think about the long-term consequences.
So, to wrap this all up, the main takeaway is that subconscious psychological operations, SCOPS, they aren't just conspiracy theory stuff, according to experts like BK. They're potentially real strategies.
Leveraging how our brains work, our emotions, our vulnerability.
Exactly. To influence beliefs, maybe on a massive scale. And the COVID-19 period, as we discussed, offers a really compelling, if controversial, case study for how these tactics might look in action. Shifting opinion, normalizing compliance.
The bottom line really seems to be awareness, cultivating that critical mindset. Like that source said, stay alert.
Just sizzling.
Yeah, or just stay awake and thinking. Actively question the information you get, especially from major media and authority figures. That's your best defense.
Absolutely. Question everything. And maybe think about recent events in the world. Can you identify any of those potential SKPS phases BK talked about? Definitely food for thought.
And for anyone wanting to dig deeper, that YouTube channel BK mentioned, Homath, apparently offers a SKOPS cheat sheet via their Patreon or membership. Could be another resource for building that awareness.
Worth checking out if you want to stay vigilant.